Hello, everyone. I'm so sorry to interrupt. If I could please have your attention. I just want to let you all know that the food is ready. It's just outside through those doors, so please feel free to grab some lunch and come back on in and get situated before the event starts. Thank you so much.
Green is on.
If I may have everyone's attention, please. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I hope you all are enjoying your food. Just a quick reminder that the event will begin in 5 minutes. So if you hadn't had a chance yet already, please go ahead and help yourself to some great food outside. And with that, I'll let you enjoy your food and we will begin the event in just 5 minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Strassman, and I am the Dean's Chief Ambassador for the UC Riverside School of Public Policy, and I will be serving as your MC for today. Thank you. Welcome to She Counts, a data-driven conversation about IE women's well-being, hosted by the Center for Community Solutions, a research center at the UCR School of Public Policy. Thank you all for joining us today. To give you a preview of what to expect for today's program, we will begin with opening remarks from the School of Public Policy's Dean, Dr. Mark Long. Afterwards, the COO of Alta Loma Enterprises, Nefertiti Long, will share some remarks. And then Dr. Justine Ross, Executive Director of the Center for Community Solutions, will give a presentation. Finally, there will be a panel moderated by Inland Empire Community Foundation CEO, Michelle Decker. Our panelists for today are Conscious Inclusion Company CEO, Susan Freeman, Healthy Valley Communities CEO, Jennifer O'Farrell, Inland Empire Community Collaborative CEO, Susan Gomez, School of Education Dean, Joy Spencer, and Center for Community Solutions Faculty Director, Dr. Qingfang Wang. Now it is my honor to introduce Dean Mark Long. Dr. Mark Long began his role as Dean of the UCR School of Public Policy in January of 2023. Previously, he was a professor of public policy and governance and adjunct professor of economics at the University of Washington. He served as the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance's Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs, as well as Associate Dean for Research. Prior to that, he served as George Washington University as an Assistant Professor of Economics and Public Policy and Administration. Dean Long holds a PhD and MA in economics, as well as an MPP from the University of Michigan, and he also holds a secondary teaching credential via UCLA and a BA in studio art from DePauw University. Please join me in welcoming Dean Long to the stage.
Thank you, Rachel. So as Rachel said, my formal training as a PhD was in economics. And if you've ever taken a class in economics, you will notice that the faculty are obsessed with efficiency, whether a market is producing an efficient outcome, or if there's market failures where government intervention could ameliorate those market failures and reduce the economic inefficiency in the market. So if you think for a second, though, what do they mean by efficiency and why do they care? Well, what they mean is that there could be some transfer of resources that would make both parties better off. And so if we have an inefficient outcome, it would suggest that making that transfer would make both parties better off. And that would do what? Well, it would raise each person's, well, what an economist would say is it would raise each person's utility. But utility is just another way of saying well-being. It would make each person better off. Okay, well, embedded in that is some kind of assumption that as a society, we care about each individual person's welfare, and that our social welfare, our total welfare as a society, is some function of those individual welfares. So if you're a utilitarian, you would say what we care about is the sum of the utilities or the average utility. And we wouldn't necessarily care about the distribution of utility, but that's not the only kind of social welfare function. There's other kinds of social welfare functions that actually care about not just how much utility I have and that you have and the next person has, but how that utility is distributed across people, how that well-being is distributed across people. So anytime I teach economics, I always start from a social welfare function. And I start to say, like, well, what do we care about as society and what are we trying to maximize? But for a lot of economists, that's where it stops. And the reason it stops there is because there's been, at least historically, an unwillingness or a lack of confidence in the ability to measure well-being, to measure happiness. That's starting to break down. I think over the last, I'd say over my career, there's been more willingness to try to directly measure how well people are doing and also to care about how is that well-being distributed. So what the Center for Community Solutions, what Justine Ross is going to be presenting today, is this result of looking at the well-being of women in the IE and how it's distributed. And so I really want to applaud that work, applaud the center and that work, because I think it's important that we understand not just these things theoretically, but actually empirically what's going on and what's going on with well-being. So thank you and welcome today.
Thank you so much, Dean Long. At this point, I would now like to introduce the CEO of Altaloma Enterprises, Nefertiti Long. As the Chief Operating Officer, she leverages decades of financial leadership to support businesses and nonprofit leaders through strategic advising and community building. She serves on several regional boards, including the Inland Empire Community Foundation, where she plays a pivotal role in the Women's Giving Fund, a philanthropic initiative that mobilizes resources and partnerships to uplift women and girls through grant making, community engagement, and sustained investment in equitable communities. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Thank you for that very eloquent introduction. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So it is my pleasure to be here today, and I'm grateful for the relationship with UCR. So a little bit about the Women's Giving Fund and how it started. So back in 2018, I really started at a dinner as initial founders. We came together, and what we had in common is we were all in philanthropy, or really embracing, or had a heart for our community. And we all felt blessed at where we were at personally in our lives and our journeys, and how could we help other women within our community thrive and grow. So that night we talked about, should we focus on one issue? Women's health, that's a big one. Mental and physical health, women's economics, women's education. We landed on, let's just focus on any and all issues that impact women in the Inland Empire. Hence, it started off as a Women's Giving Circle, branched off into the Women's Giving Fund was formed. And ultimately, we looked at the Women's Giving Fund as a way to collaborate and bring together women throughout the community, pool resources, and use those resources to give back to women's causes. So back in, wanted to mention, to date, since founding, we've granted $249,000 in grants within our community. Thank you. So we've raised a lot of money too, but I'm more proud of the money we've seeded back into our community. So in 2024, the Women's Giving Fund Committee discussed, well, we've been doing this granting for a while. We've given to organizations that really have made an impact, but we really want to understand deeper than that on what are the main things that are impacting women within the community. What are the numbers, and how are they feeling in the IE? So that's when we decided to commission research to understand women in San Bernardino and Riverside County, and where did they need help with the most. And through this process, we felt with this information, we could better target our giving. So hence the relationship with UCR, which was an easy relationship given we've done other things, Inland Empire Community Foundation with UCR related to research. And we knew they were a very viable partner for us. So that's why we are all here today, to understand and get a deep dive on that research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Long. At this point, I would now like to introduce the Executive Director for the Center for Community Solutions, Dr. Justine Ross. Yeah. Okay. Drawing upon nearly a decade of experience with 4 School of Public Policy research centers, Dr. Ross is responsible for developing a strategic plan to help guide CCS's growth, meeting with community leaders from local government, nonprofit organizations, and businesses to identify major public policy questions of local importance, and convening with center personnel to devise research methods that address these questions. In her role, she also oversees the center's Student Fellows program. With that, I would like to welcome Dr. Ross up to the podium.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here this afternoon. Good afternoon. We're really looking forward to being able to share sort of the full findings from this exploratory kind of micro study that we ran with the Women's Giving Fund. So for those of you who attended IECF Spring Fling, a little bit of this is going to be a refresher, but we'll very quickly get into some new findings. So just stick with me through the first 4 minutes. So for context, we were approached by the Women's Giving Fund with this very broad question of sort of what is the state of women's well-being in the Inland Empire? And in particular, they were interested in understanding and sort of trying to gain insight into this question through the lens of the vital conditions framework. So the idea that your well-being isn't determined by any single one area of your life. It's not just your health or your income or your environment. You really need sort of all of these different domains, these different factors that are interconnected and mutually reinforcing to support and maximize an individual's well-being. And so it was sort of through this lens that we devised a sort of research plan where we were going to analyze publicly available data for women in Riverside and San Bernardino counties, compare them with women in other counties in Southern California, and then also develop and run an original survey. And we're going to focus today on the survey findings. So we surveyed 1,000 women who live in Riverside and San Bernardino counties, 500 from each. We ran the survey earlier this year through a survey research firm called Dynata. They maintain panels of respondents. It makes it very easy for us to get our questions in front of women in the IE that mirror the actual, the general population in terms of age and race and income and marital status. The survey is administered online. It's about 6 minutes in length to answer. And it included both questions replicated from really established major surveys, which put us in conversation with sort of this broader narrative, and then also some original questions that were kind of devised in conversation with Women's Giving Fund and some meetings that we had. And so specifically, the questions that we asked included those related to Cantrell's ladder, which if you completed the worksheet in front of you, you're very familiar with now. We asked Cantrell's ladder questions. We asked some demographic questions. We asked some attitudinal and situational questions. So you can think about things like, what % of your monthly income goes to housing costs? Or here's a statement, may or may not describe your life. On a scale of 1 to 5, to what extent do you agree or disagree? Additionally, we included 2 open-ended questions that allowed people to self-identify and volunteer areas where they thought the IE was a particular source of either support or hindrance to their overall well-being. And the idea with this research was that we wanted to use Cantrell's ladder to get sort of this idea of the distribution of well-being in the IE. So Cantrell's ladder is used across sort of communities that have adopted the vital conditions framework. It's also used by a lot of researchers, so there's a lot of data and sort of information that we can use to help interpret and ensure that our results are generalizable, which is helpful for us. Additionally, the sort of last 3 types of questions we use to try to get at sort of variation in who experiences well-being. So we wanted to get some insight to the extent that we were able in this very short survey of who is more likely to be experiencing high levels of well-being, and of what does their day-to-day lived experience actually look like. And so there we go. We talked to 1,000 women. Again, these these are sort of abridged results. Obviously, we're trying to get through it relatively quickly today, but if you're interested in the full demographic breakdown, at the end of this presentation, there's a QR code and you can scan it and get to sort of the report for that. But to give you an idea of the kind of who we're in conversation with here, our average respondent is a woman who's about 45 years old. She's completed some college. She works part-time, and she makes between or her household rather, earns between $51,000 and $80,000 of income per year. We also obviously asked questions about race and ethnicity. We're not breaking out for them here because across our analyses, race and ethnicity were not statistically significant differentiators in well-being or life experience. Obviously, it's because of the questions that we asked, the way that we asked them. But if you're interested in sort of what the racial breakdown is, again, look at that report at the very end. And then additionally, these I just think are interesting. Again, trying to get a sense of like who are we hearing from, who are we talking to? And it's wholly coincidental that these are all roughly 30%, but roughly 30% of our sample speak a language other than English at home. Roughly 30% are the caregiver to a child who is under the age of 18. Roughly 30% are a caregiver to somebody who is over 18 years of age, at least 5 hours a week. I know, wow, I was surprised by that one too. And then roughly 30% are severely housing cost burdened, meaning that they are spending over 50% of their monthly income as a household on housing costs. And so with this sort of picture in mind, we started with Cantrill's ladder. So Cantrill's ladder, again, if you did your homework and looked at the worksheet, asked you to imagine your life as sort of this ladder where at the very top of the ladder, that's the best possible life that you can have. And the bottom is the worst possible life. And you're asked two questions. Where on that ladder are you today? And where do you think you're going to be in 5 years? And then based on your answers, you're grouped into one of three well-being categories. You're either thriving, struggling, or suffering. And these categories obviously map onto the numbers, but there's also a substantial body of research that shows they map onto very specific life experiences too. So you can predict things like the number of days somebody will call out sick to work in a year based on their well-being category. And so it's with this in mind that we asked these two questions of 1,000 women. And we found that 36% of women in the EIE are thriving, 58% are struggling, and roughly 6% are suffering. And so for point of comparison, Gallup runs these same questions at a national and international scale. So we have a decent point of comparison. And we found that women in the IE struggle at a rate that's nearly as high as the global population average. So that is men and women. And they struggle at a rate that's nearly 15% higher than the US general population. And so for us, this gives us sort of an understanding of the breakdown of the distribution. We're not going to spend too much time on these findings because they were presented previously, but gives you an idea of, again, sort of, thinking about sort of how well-being is distributed in the IE. This hopefully gives you some sense, at least as a starting point. And so it was with this in mind that we turned and we were interested in sort of unpacking to the extent that we were able, sort of what are the differences across your lived experience based on whether you belong to each of these categories. And so really, again, there's that big body of research that tells us generally what these categories map onto, but we wanted to know like day-to-day lived experience in the IE. And so especially, there might be some insights to Neff's point that she made earlier. If there's an area where everybody's doing similarly and they're all doing well in a certain vital condition, then maybe you direct funding and resources to the other 6, for instance. I'm going to give you a second with this slide because there's a lot going on, and I apologize, I could not figure out how to make it more concise. So take a second. The short of it is that we presented the respondents with these 12 statements, and they map onto the different vital conditions. We asked them to tell us the extent to which they agreed or disagreed with each on a scale of 1 to 5. And so the graph is plotting the percent of agreement per well-being category for each statement. So the green bar corresponds to the percent of people who agreed who are suffering, gold to those who are struggling, and coral to those who are thriving. And then we group the statements in such a way that those statements that are more toward the left of the screen are those where there's sort of less disparity across the groups. And then those on the right, there's more disparity, they're less similar. All right, you with me? Graph makes sense? Okay, good. So in terms of sort of how do we think about this, I think there will be more to come sort of unpacking this in the panel. I think we have, fortunately, a lot of experts who can speak to kind of what this might look like more so day to day. But starting with, most similar, obviously, we see things like transportation. There's some similarity in experience. There's still about a 20% difference, but there's some similarity. We also see things like having safe and reliable transportation is relatively similar. But if you look to statements 8 through 12, we're then looking at statements where the difference in agreement among the respondents was between 30 and 40% on average. So these are pretty substantial differences. And I should note all of these differences across the board are statistically significant. But looking at the most different statements, I think these sort of give us insight into where we have opportunities to grow and where we can do better, because we are doing better by those who are thriving. And in many cases, even by those who are struggling relative to those who are suffering. And I think the other nice thing about sort of the way that this worked out and what the data show is that statements 8 through 12 are really cross-cutting across different vital conditions, across different areas of life. So for instance, you have disparity with respect to the extent to which people feel their basic needs are met. With respect to education, where they go if they want to learn something new. Having a strong sense of belonging in their community. This is a really big one that will come up in a couple of slides again. The extent to which their work is meaningful, rewarding, their ability to pay for necessities after they spend money on rent and mortgage. All to say, again, this will be unpacked later. Again, I know there's a lot going on. We'll get into it more later. But with sort of now this picture of both the distribution of well-being and then distribution of kind of differences in lived experience, I guess, and kind of insights that we might be able to glean there. We then turn to kind of this final question, which is who is thriving, struggling, and suffering in the IE? And trying to get a sense of, are there certain patterns in the data that suggest that certain people with certain credentials or, certain backgrounds may be more at risk to be struggling or suffering than others? And so we ran a variety of statistical analyses. We're presenting one model today that models what category you're in, what well-being category. So are you thriving, struggling, or suffering based on your income, education, age, belonging, race, caregiver status, and whether you have a child under 18. And so again, this is just one of many, but I think it's particularly impactful. And what we find is that only the variables in the top row are statistically significant predictors. So income, education when it's interacted with income, so not on its own, age, and belonging. Before I jump into these one by one, just as a note of caution, none of these analyses are causal. So nothing that we can do here today, or nothing that I'm saying here today, we can't take to the bank in terms of, belonging causes well-being. It's, associated with, but just again, word of caution as you're thinking about this. There would need to be a lot more work done to be able to get at that. So diving into income, I think, probably unsurprisingly, the higher your income is, the more likely you are to be in a higher well-being category. And in particular, when you look at sort of how we asked about income, they're buckets that ranges about $30,000. So moving from one bucket, that's a $30,000 range, to the next, increases your odds of being in a higher Cantrell ladder category by about 20%. So just that $30,000 jump gets you about 20%, or increases your odds by about 20%. Education, there we go. Education, again, doesn't on its own predict higher levels of well-being, but it does when we consider it and interact it with income. So what do we mean there? Well, that sort of, simply, I guess, put, is that education kind of amplifies the effect of income. So when you think about it, maybe if you take somebody who has a decent income and has a higher level of education, maybe that means that they have access to a job that, provides them greater stability than somebody who had the exact same income but less education. Maybe they have greater meaning in the work. Maybe the types of jobs that are available to you when you have higher levels of education provide, more meaning, and that is then reflected in your well-being. I'll just say sort of, we can hypothesize about what that might mean. The panel might do some of that. But education essentially at the end of the day kind of helps people get more out of their income. So it is associated positively with well-being. All right. Third, being older is very, very minimally, both with respect to the size of the effect and its statistical significance, very minimally associated with decreased well-being. That said, this is by far and away the smallest effect that we detect. It is by far and away, it's barely statistically significant. It just came in, high enough that we could report it. But this makes sense because when you think about Cantrill's ladder and the questions, one of the questions asks you, how do you think you're going to be in 5, or, where are you going to be on the ladder in 5 years? And as you get older, you could think of, a variety of reasons why you might be less optimistic about what 5 years from now is going to look like. But to give you context, to compare it to income, for each additional year of age that you have, there is a less than 1% decrease in your odds of being in a higher Cantrill ladder category relative to income, which was 20%. And then finally, this is the big one. So if you remember from that horrible graph slide, there was a statement where we said, I feel I have a strong feeling of belonging in my community. So we incorporated that into this model, and we find that by far and away, having a higher feeling of belonging is positively associated with having a higher Cantrill ladder or well-being category. And so to give you an idea of kind of what we mean here, because it's kind of a fuzzy, like squishy topic, what does belonging mean? If you think about it, if Sally says she's a 3, for instance, on the belonging scale, out of that 1 to 5, agree to disagree. If she says, I'm a 3, and Jane says, I'm a 4, Jane has nearly double the odds of being in a higher Cantrill ladder category than Sally, who's only one point behind her on that same belonging scale. To give you a sense, again, for comparison, I think an increase of 1 point in the belonging scale, and I'm reading because I want to make sure I get it right, but an increase of 1 point in the belonging scale is comparable to a roughly $150,000 increase in income in terms of the impact it has in increasing your odds of moving up Cantrill's ladder and those well-being categories. So it's really significant. It's very large. That said, we at the end of the day, there is some room. We could say we're measuring belonging, but that again could be kind of squishy. Maybe we're proxying for something else, but I do think it's warranted. It's a very statistically significant relationship. It is a major, a significant association. So, and it's nice because we're doing this work with IECF that uses the vital conditions framework, and the vital conditions framework positions belonging as central to the other 6 vital conditions. And so we're sort of seeing that bear out in the data here. So where does that sort of leave us in summary? Well, we know that with respect to Cantrill's ladder, women in the IE struggle at a higher rate than the US average. They thrive at a lower rate. And there also is a really noticeable difference in sort of lived day-to-day experience among women in the IE. We also know that income, education combined with income, and to a lesser extent age, are associated with what your well-being sort of category is, what your Cantrill ladder category is. And we find, again, that feelings of belonging are a really strong predictor of where you're going to land on Cantrill's ladder. So sort of in summary, where does this leave us? What the Women's Giving Fund's goal was to help sort of give this baseline data that would allow us to have kind of a common touch point, a common understanding, which we've done. And they also really want to try to catalyze conversations around investment and policy change and program development as to sort of how do we make thriving the sort of expectation in the region as opposed to more of an exception. And so fortunately, we have a panel that's going to kick us off and really start that conversation for us. So before I leave it to them really quickly, if you're interested in that demographic information, scan the QR code on the left. We're just starting our LinkedIn page as a center. Also, so soft plug, if you want to follow us, scan the QR code on the right. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel's coming back up. Rachel will take us from here. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross, for that presentation. With all those findings in mind, I would now like to introduce our stellar panel. So if our panelists could please take your seats up front, I will now introduce you all one by one. First, our moderator will be Inland Empire Community Foundation CEO, Michelle Decker. As CEO, she leads the organization's strategic direction and champions a culture of philanthropy grounded in impact, equity, and regional growth. With over 30 years of leadership in community economic development, she brings experience in participatory development and mission-driven innovation across both rural and urban communities. Welcome, Ms. Decker. Next, I would like to introduce the CEO of the Conscious Inclusion Company, Susan Freeman. Ms. Freeman leads strategy and training to help private companies build more equitable. Apologies about that. More equitable, inclusive workplace cultures, where individuals from communities historically excluded from the boardroom can thrive. She brings valuable private sector perspective to the conversation and can speak to how company culture and systems transformation can shape broader outcomes and have a ripple effect for women in our region. Welcome, Ms. Freeman. Our next panelist is the CEO of the Healthy Valleys Foundation, Jennifer O'Farrell. As CEO, Ms. O'Farrell leads collective impact efforts to enhance physical, mental, and social health across the Inland Empire. A seasoned nonprofit leader, she has launched pioneering programs such as the region's first Big Brothers Big Sisters, and driven initiatives against human trafficking, leveraging strategic partnerships to create generational transformation in well-being for local families. Thank you for joining us, Ms. O'Farrell. I would like to next introduce the Director of Community Building and Engagement at Neighborhood Partnership Housing Services, Karen Serrano. As director at Neighborhood Partnership Housing Services, she leverages over a decade of experience in housing, workforce development, and small business support to forge multi-sector partnerships that drive measurable impact. Previously, she served as the Vice President of Making Hope Happen Foundation and Assistant Vice President at Wells Fargo in Community Economic Development and Strategy. Next, I would like to introduce the Dean of the UCR School of Education, Dr. Joy Spencer. Dr. Spencer is an expert in mathematics education and equity in education systems. Her scholarship examines how students from historically marginalized backgrounds experience STEM learning and how educators can foster equity, access, and inclusion in their classrooms as well as across the broader education system. Spencer is co-founder of the Summer STEAM Academies, which provide research-based STEM learning experiences for youth in our local community. Through this opportunity, middle and high school students are introduced to the university, mentored by UCR students, and prepared for college. Thank you for joining us, Dean Spencer. And last but not least, I would like to introduce the faculty director for the UCR Center for Community Solutions, Dr. Chin-Fong Wong. Her research focuses on economic and community development, immigration, labor market inequality, and to a slightly lesser extent, housing. Across domains, her work studies how race, gender, and place shape opportunity, with a particular focus on entrepreneurship and labor integration among historically marginalized communities in SoCal and beyond. With that, let's give a warm round of applause to all of our panelists.
I get to go now? Okay, great. My only regret is we only have 30 minutes with this panel. But we are gonna power this up. Two things very quickly. Great partnership with UCR and the Center for Community Solutions. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dr. Ross. All right. very much, and to my board and just the Women's Giving Fund and all of the philanthropic work our board is doing connected to data and trying to be really smart about it. We don't have the resources in the Inland Empire to fix the big problems that we see. We've got to raise more of those resources. We do it by making compelling arguments, I think, with data as well as our heartstrings. But just really appreciate that. So I'm grateful to be here. Let's get a warmer going, a warm up going. Something that stood out for you, surprised you in this data. Susan, I'll start with you.
But how's that better?
Yeah.
Let me lower my voice a bit. So I think for me, the big deal is belonging. And in the work that I do in corporate America with mostly Fortune 100 companies, they truly don't understand the difference between fitting in and belonging. And I think in something that I teach called muted group theory, we see how the people who created the systems that I work with did so in their own language. For example, if a meeting for department heads is at 8 a.m. on Wednesday, why would that be? Well, maybe because the person calling that meeting finds that time convenient, but doesn't consider the fact that many of the people on his, or usually his, team are women with kids at home. They're feeding them, they're clothing them, they're carpooling them. So they look at that meeting time and go, I'll never be able to promote up to that. So things around belonging mean a lot to me in the work that I do. I feel like all too often we change who we are to fit into the system we serve. And that is where my work comes in. I try to change the system instead. So we look at a macro level, much like what Mark was talking about. What can we do to change the social contract, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Jen?
Well, it's lovely to be here. Michelle, I think when you asked, I think the most striking surprise, and I know Dr. Ross, you said it was a small percentage, but was the age. And part of that was at Healthy Valley, we started with a listening tour. And so met with 160 seniors, so 65 plus, and then met with 75 high school students. They all said the same barriers. They all said the same struggles. But the difference was their hope indicator in the end. And our young people felt like they had time. They had time and hope to change, dream. And our more tenured were like, is it going to happen? And so I think that's a striking of where we show up as women.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I know I walked in after the presentation was done, but just reviewing the report and looking at some of the data, like I think for me, it's always so heart-wrenching when more than 50% feel like they're struggling. Yeah. Like that to me is just thinking about the women in my life, right? And the women that we interact with every single day, like more than half of the women that we're interacting with might be struggling and we don't know about it. And so I think for me, that's the part where I'm like, okay, how can we show it better? How can I show it better? What can we be doing? What are we going to come up with today in this room?
Mine is a little challenge because it's blinking. So can I? This one also? Let's see. Can you hear me? Here we go. Great. Sorry. Okay. So the one that stood out for me really was the caregiving one. You know, people are about 30% caring for folks who are under 18 and the same percentage over 18. And I really wonder how many of that is an overlap where people are caring simultaneously for folks under 18 and over 18. And I think about my own experience, not to draw too much of that in here. Our family's been here for 35 years. And that is my brother and I, that's our experience. And it's experience of so many people where I'm simultaneously caring for an aging parent who struggled, who now we feel so much responsibility for, and then simultaneously taking care of children. And that for me is really what stood out. And I would love to dive into that. It is, yeah, powerful.
Thank you. Dr. Nguyen?
So it's not surprising to me, but it's more about the urgency related to women's support work, because we're not surprised by the association between income and education and well-being. but it's the strongest association between sense of belonging and the feel, the well-being, you know. So it really means the work is not only about money anymore. It's really a holistic approach to support women.
Thank you. Susan, so super quick, sorry. The vital conditions, we didn't really get to explain them. They are a framework, and seeing some of my friends in the room who know this and have been on this journey. For us, we needed to find a framework to begin to think about where we should invest as a foundation. And we also needed a way to measure what we were doing. And we found a bit of a plug and play in the vital conditions framework. And we have worked with a number of community-based organizations, nonprofit partners to get that shared language so that we could collaborate better. But it is humane housing, reliable transportation, a thriving natural world, basic needs and safety, meaningful work and wealth, and lifelong learning. So that's the wheel. Every person, every place needs to be able to have those conditions to thrive, to get to the top of that ladder. At the center is belonging and civic muscle. Belonging and civic muscle and meaningful work and wealth are outsized in their impact for the other areas. So for those working on job creation and entrepreneurship, connecting education to job creation, and for those who are helping people have some civic muscle, those are probably why we see those and those stand out, and where they don't exist, it's a bigger problem. So I just wanted to pause on that, and happy to share more about that framework. So I do want to go into the meaningful work and wealth. Susan, if women have higher incomes, they're going to be experiencing more meaningful work for themselves. Obviously, they're going to have some education behind that by and large. So what is the strategy companies can use? And I also kind of want to throw in the public sector too, sort of the investments to give women workers meaning and purpose at a higher scale, like from your landscape or what you know?
Well, since you mentioned from my landscape, now I'm really comfortable answering. But before I was like, oh, what did the data say? Oh my God. No, truly in the work that I do, which is a lot of what we discussed here, Dr. Teresa Amabile, that's how you pronounce it. Some people say Amabile. She just retired from Harvard University, but she's done a lot of work around intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And in the work that Dr. Deborah Tannen of Georgetown University has done, she talks a lot about what motivates women versus what motivates men. And I find in my work, in real life, hands-on, viewing this, interviewing these people, holding their hands and listening in a safe area to their complaints or their suffering, that they are truly in need of much more autonomy in the workplace. Things that will make them happy at the work that they do, more than money. Of course, everyone could use the money, right? But would you stay at a job that you're super unhappy at if you could go to one where you're extremely happy that paid just slightly less? The studies show that people want to be intrinsically motivated and aligned in their value systems with what they do day to day. In fact, they do things like take vacation. I'm that geek. When I get vacation time, I go learn more about the stuff I'm learning. That's what brings me joy, right? And sadly, according to my husband, I'll even do it for free. So, you know, he's like, there has to be some balance. But I think that's one of the keys in any company. They need to think, an organization in the city government, state government, and federal government, what brings my employees joy? You know, you can make a ton of money and go get entertained, right? We spend money on entertainment, but what brings us true joy? And I think that's what women mostly look for, is joy in what they do day and night.
Wish we had all day. I know. You know, and a little bit, this will get a little freeform because there's a lot of great stuff to pull out. Jennifer, I want to go back to the aging cycle. I want to go back to the women that you've talked to in the Hemet area, the pocket of potential. She already branded Hemet. It's a pocket of potential. What models, like what is going to make a difference in the lives of the women? And you've identified a particular problem too that I think you're working on that maybe you should mention.
What models? Yeah.
What do you want to do, Jennifer?
Watch out, people. Go put your parking meter back on. No, I mean, so thinking about specifically season. So it's an interesting phase, I'll say, in my own journey where most of my work has been done in child development, and shifting into one of the most bubbling up kind of data is that Hemet and San Jacinto have 27% 65 plus, which is the largest in the entire Riverside County. And so really, how can we look at creating some models within the valley to be able to translate into other parts of the region? But one of the things that bubbled up that surprised me the most was the unsecure housing, and that we were having, and I see my buddy Tanya in the back from Workforce Development and Housing, but really the reality of our first river bottom finders were 65 plus first time homeless. And thinking, how do we begin swimming upstream for our growing unhoused population because of housing insecurity? And that's with fixed incomes, that's with the high rising house pricing. So going fast forwarding to what are we doing? We're putting great minds together. So I think some of the models is, how do we put into a senior think tank? How do we get in our experts within the county, nonprofits, our FQHCs? How would we bring in the health sector and CBOs, nonprofits to the table to say, what are our best practices? What do we know? What are solutions? What are solutions that we can do on a temporary basis? Because we all know that housing takes a long time. And how do we begin looking at short-term wins like Prop 19, where you can transfer property tax from one house to another to downsize? How do we begin creating senior summits that are educating and bringing life services onto HOA properties, that we can begin talking about renter rights and being able to keep people in house? So all that to say is, how do we start creating models based on experts that are doing it, practitioners that are walking through it, and then saying, what can we pilot for the next 6 months? What can we pilot for the next year, so that we can age in dignity, and so that we can see for our women specifically in the Valley, because they are, I think, to Dr. Spencer's point, we are seeing that they are the grandmas caring for their grandchildren, and they're caring for their spouse. And so the burden, this invisible burden that is not being shared of unpaid work, is a true reality that's going to keep people in the suffering and struggling, and not in the thriving space.
The revolution is on. Okay.
In the pocket of potential.
In the pocket of potential. I love it. But, this is the Inland Empire. And if I'm always kind of going, I just got back from LA this morning, and it's like, people say, what's up in the IE? And I go, innovative. Like, come on, like, come pay attention. Karen, safety in neighborhoods and some work that you're doing around kind of community planning and neighborhood planning to give that sense of belonging. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, a lot of people that we get to talk to, so we build housing, we're affordable housing developers in the affordable homeownership space, right? Like, yay, we want to build more housing. And yes, it does take a really long time, but it's mostly on the system side, right? The city side, and trying to get through those permitting processes and entitlement. And so we have a lot of work to do in streamlining that. But when we get to work in a neighborhood, I get to visit with the neighbors and talk to them, and they tell me their stories about this blighted property on their lot, right, for the last 20 years. And it's frustrating. But what's beautiful is that over the years, right, all the neighbors feel the same way about this blighted lot. And so what we want to do is, how do we create more opportunities for neighbors to connect with each other and talk to each other and lean on each other, so that we can do something about those blighted lots, right? And so I have the privilege of working with residents and asking them, like, well, what could we be doing better? What else is needed? What else can we do? Pick up the phone, call the school district. Hi, your high school is down the street from where we're doing development. What are you working on? How can we support you? Well, it turns out that not just the neighbors are frustrated about this vacant blighted lot, but the youth at the local high school want to also solve this problem. And so really there's so many opportunities in our community already, like our youth, right, want to problem solve and work together and figure, and it's up to us to go in and ask the question, go in and talk to our neighbors. Like, they're not strangers. They live in our community. And again, like this 58%, like it just bothers me that people are struggling and we don't know who they are necessarily. And so it just takes a conversation. It just takes us showing up in our own neighborhoods, or in neighborhoods where we see where there's a struggle, and being able to connect those folks to each other increases a sense of belonging, increases their sense of like, I matter here in this neighborhood. I visit newer neighborhoods and they don't know each other. And it's heartbreaking because then I get to meet the lonely single parent or the kiddo who, sees that there's another kiddo living 2 doors down and they're not connecting but want to. And I watched in other neighborhoods where it was the kids that dragged their parents out to our little block party. And then they got a chance to meet each other and commiserate over the things that they are also, frustrated about. And so again, giving folks the avenues, the outlets, the creative opportunities to connect with each other, even if it's in a vacant, blighted lot. There is so much creativity, innovation, love that is coming from these households because they want to see something better for the kids that live in those places. And it just takes us, all of you, you can do that today.
Susan?
Just some good news to share with the people in the room. I heard it through the grapevine that the city is decreasing the amount of time it takes to get permitting for new housing by putting the onus on the developers and their attorneys to make statements. And once those statements are made and signed, the city's attorneys won't have to re-review and do the same thing that your own lawyers have done. Thus, the process is less costly and takes less time, but then the risk is on the developer.
Anything to cut it. So we'll get to that because what can we do is kind of our closer question, but community organizing 101 and to not let the assumptions we're making about each other get in the way. I mean, we really are living with technology and patterns of driving everywhere that have really alienated us. So thank you. Thank you. Dr. Spencer, I've kind of got two questions. I'm gonna mash them up into one. As a dean of education, as a leader in this community on education, you're seeing the data where it has to connect with jobs and it has to result in something. So I think it's a two-part: ideas and strategies so that education is meaningful for women, and then access to education. Like more women in the IE still need to get access to higher education and to training. And so either of those, how you weave those together from where you sit.
Sure, thank you. The meaningful work. I think women want to engage in meaningful work. I've been doing work in the informal education space for over a decade. That's that Saturdays, after school, summers. When I did just a quick survey to see what are the summer opportunities available to young people in the Inland Empire this summer, I found maybe 4 in Riverside. Then I put in Inland Empire, maybe 6. So, and if you think about if that's for kids, what's the learning opportunities for elderly people? What are the learning opportunities for just everyday working women? When you compare that to San Diego, for example, it's by factors of 10, the difference in the type of learning opportunities. So I think a big piece of this is folks want to do meaningful work, but they have to have opportunities to dream. They have to have opportunities to, in the informal spaces, to learn and to grow and to think outside of what they're exposed to and what they have opportunity to. So first ways, if I could find folks in industry to help underwrite opportunities for women to come and do informal educational learning, for young women to do informal educational learning, whether it's from not just learning how to use technology, but how to master technology, how to be the creators and innovators. I would love for someone to fund for me to bring young women to the campus to learn how to develop thriving, beautiful, tree-filled communities. I cannot tell you how many young students I talk to who say that they're tired of seeing warehouses up and down the freeway, but they're helpless. They feel helpless that they don't have an opportunity to engage. We could teach that with pedagogies that will actually help young people, young women grow and become the next developers for this community, not just the folks who get jobs. Because again, it's about meaningful work. And I think a lot of young women feel like they can get a job. I don't think that's the issue, but are they going to be able to do work that speaks to the deepness of what they want to do and the transformation of their lives and of their communities, of their families, that sort of thing. So education is tied deeply into this. We dream big in education, and I really just need some partners to come and dream with us.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Wayne, same for you. I've sort of got the Blendy mashup. You go in any direction you want. One is around entrepreneurship and women as entrepreneurs, and growing businesses to grow wealth, to maybe break out of some of the segregation that we find in the formal employment sector. But the related question would be, what strategies do you see that can promote economic development that supports women? Because I know you've been in. Sorry about that, guys.
First, related to Joy just talked about the education part. We think the workforce training and the workforce development in this region is very important, especially in the sense that we're not a Silicon Valley. But we are talking about right now how to develop our economy, especially in some high growth field, like clean energy, supply chain technology, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, how to really create the workforce, especially provide a pathway for women, especially women of color in this high growth field. I think is extremely important, especially because women and people of color, they are underrepresented in this high paid job. So that's the first thing. Second, entrepreneurship has been more about Silicon Valley type of entrepreneurship, high growth, high technology men. But women and people of color, they are seldom in the field of entrepreneurship. Yeah, how to really provide the flexible capital. For instance, capital is a big barrier there, and also foster the inclusive entrepreneurship ecosystem. We say inclusive is really about help the equitable access to the resources, including capital, space, infrastructure. And also one big field is government contracts, which is really procurement. For instance, university and the government has spent large amount of money purchasing, but how to really provide more opportunities for small businesses, especially those owned by women, by people of color, through training, coaching, and work them into that pipeline to really benefit from this big spending. And then the last thing is, I think there should be some systematic strategy to put this, to integrate the unpaid job, informal job, into the formalized labor market system. Yeah, and especially entrepreneurship side, we should also look at those, like leverage the cultural and community assets Some women really do very well in like creative arts and care, and those fields seldom receive enough support from economic development field. Yeah, I want to say is when we talk about a women job, I hope we don't always link them to philanthropy, link them with social. I really hope someday when we talked about economic development policy, we are the main character in the stage. Yeah.
Bunsry. Bunsry's fired up. Anybody wants to stay for the after huddle? Oh boy. Ay, ay, ay. Take your pick. What would you like to engage our audience with? We've got an ask out here for some good scaling. What would you like to say we can do today? But maybe also, what is an underleveraged opportunity? Because I am a huge believer, we've got a ton of assets. Is there something we should be using and leveraging for women that we aren't, that we could just put out as a dream here? So either one, tell us what to do. As the rule one of the moderators, Susan, would you please kick us off?
No, that's okay. We all have opinions about this, I'm sure. For me, I'm passionate about women in technology. I work strongly and tightly and deeply and all the leads with the women across this country to get more youth involved, especially young girls in technology. I work to collaborate between the private sector and the education sector to bridge the money gap. I helped to bring Genentech, who ultimately gave $25 million to the school system in South San Francisco to build a lab so that they could train children to do the jobs that the PhDs don't do at Genentech, but still must be done. And it was a good program. And I think that this city is currently working with a local school and with Collins Aerospace to do something similar or same. So I think that getting kids off of their technology to teach them about technology in a human touch kind of way is important. I also think that the people who live in this community need to learn more about what deep tech is, what green tech is. It's not just, you know, your laptop. I mean, we really are already steeped in AI. You just don't know it. You have driverless cars, you have Bitcoin, you have augmented reality and virtual reality. A lot of people in this community don't know what those terms are. And look, education's available to everyone. My big deal is access. I work hard to make sure everyone, regardless of whatever, gender, race, age, demographic, whatever, you get access to education. And the education should be something that's gonna spring forward us as a community. And the last thing I'll say about that, and then I have to leave, I have a flight at 3:30, so I'll be leaving early. I just want to say it's really important to learn, to continue learning. We used to think we'd go to high school, we'd get a diploma or a degree. We'd go to college, we get a diploma or degree, and we're done. We're not done. Read, Google things, go to the library. We have one of the most amazing libraries I've ever been to throughout the state, right here in our own city. Yeah. And, you know, it's a tech center too. It's not just books. I love books. I have a little light reading to do on the plane. The print is so small that I may have to cheat and use Audible, but continue to learn, universal learning. Otherwise, really seriously, detriment.
Yes.
Lifting. May they lift.
I hope you lift and stay. Enjoy your conferences. It's wonderful. I'm sorry I haven't.
We're just saying, you're giving us the mic and we're going. Okay, so I have two split desires in life. One is at the time of age in life I would love that the same amount of research and money that was put into ED research and medicine would be put into perimenopause, menopause, and endometriosis. I would love that my daughter would be given the same because research has been done, that she would understand her body, that she would know who she is because she has the data and research behind it. I would love for women to be able to have that. That's my one hope. I think the other is I was thinking what could be simply done. And so just trying to think through, so the Riverside County is implementing this whole person health score. And so I was thinking about this whole person perspective and what if in every agency, so if I'm a woman and I'm coming into, whether I'm getting food at the food bank, if I'm coming in to see my primary care provider, if I'm going into the library, if I'm going into all these institutions that I come and provide services for, get services to, what if they asked me, how are you? How do you feel today? Are you struggling? Are you suffering? Are you thriving? And we were able to create cross-industry data based on census tracts and information, and to be able just to know the pulse, but it's also under the breath of kindness. And it's under the breath of, I see you and I hear you. And I go back to one of the words a mentee at Big Brothers Big Sisters had once said, is that my mentor is the first person that ever asked me how I am. And I just wonder, how many of us aren't asked how I am? And what if we had a system and process in place that we asked people all the time, I see you and I hear you. Are you struggling today? Are you suffering? Are you thriving? And we just took down notes and put that data together.
Okay, you're talking about leverage, right? What can we leverage? What can we leverage? So we are in all kinds of crisis, right? And for me, of course, it's housing, okay? But like, I feel like there's so much opportunity in this moment. Housing can help us do so many things. If someone owns their home, they can open a daycare center in their home and create a entrepreneurship opportunity and caregiving in their neighborhoods. If there's a blighted lot in your neighborhood and you're a homeowner, could your neighbors all come together and like leverage the equity in your home and buy that lot and do something productive for the kids in your neighborhood while you also simultaneously get to own that land together? When you're building a house, could you bring your family and friends together and do that sweat equity? You know, like you think about Habitat for Humanity, and you lead that in your own neighborhood so that we can house more women and their children. Is there a group of you out there right now who love real estate or are curious about real estate and want to start a cohort and want to go learn together? And like, what's the barrier? Because how can we help you do it so that you can create more opportunities? Maybe it's you help someone start renting, right? Because like, let me tell you, it doesn't take much to take women who are doing well to get back to suffering. It takes one life event. One. And I'm going to get really personal. I had to file for bankruptcy recently and start completely over. I'm getting a divorce. And I had to move in with my family for a short period of time, and housing is incredibly expensive. And so I had to get a roommate, another single mom. And I'm so grateful, right, that I found someone that I could share a home with and like be very child-centered with. How can we help other women do that? So if they're not navigating on their own. You know, because again, this can happen to anybody at any time in their life. It could be a young person, it could be someone like me, right? And so I do think we need to leverage what already exists. It's exactly, us, each other. Like, how do we bring in our families along for the ride? Like, what information are we lacking that we need to fill that might be in this room today, right? And so I think about that all the time, all the intersections in housing development, right? There's jobs in factory built housing. You got to learn technology, be able to build those houses faster, get them out into the universe, right? You know, we still need the trades. How do we get more folks to go into that? Older homes still need repair and still need plumbers and still need painters. And, you know, there's so many careers that intersect in this crisis that we need to address. but how do we leverage the people in our neighborhoods so that we can move full speed ahead and have more thriving neighborhoods?
Okay, we're an educational organization, obviously, and this is something I learned. We have an extension program here at UCR, and every summer they run these 2-week programs. This is something I learned in conversation with the dean of the extension. These are 2-week programs that are exceptional in all kinds of fields. They cost thousands of dollars, and students from all over the world come to our campus to take these courses. You need to be 16 or above to take them. Now, this is me discovering this. Bioengineering, statistics, I mean, programs that are just amazing. I said to the dean, what if we educated the kids in this neighborhood in those classes? All right, not the kid, it's great for the kids that are traveling here. Wow. So I'm personally raising $1,800 per kid. I'll be educating 15 high school kids in bioengineering this summer, right? Bioengineering, 16, these are kids from local communities that would not have access because of the way that tracking works in schools, because of the way that particular kids get pushed out of access to STEM. But this summer, we'll be doing that. And I'm going to be taking it from here on, further. And so leverage what's in front of you. It's already here. That curriculum already existed. I didn't even have to write it. And we could even design curriculum. That dean is so open. 1,800. So I'm trying, that's what I'm working on raising right now. And so there you go. That's my, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot emphasize this more, because when you ask what we can leverage, I just literally thinking about everyone in this room. If we look at what we're doing now, we combine them, we're actually supporting a holistic, a whole person development. But in practice, we understand their barriers to make silos here and there. So what under-leveraged is really something like women economic mobility hubs or something like that to coordinate the efforts. We are here today, we live, but there should be some really like this coordinated efforts, infrastructure to build from here. And then when thinking what is under-leveraged. Now, from university, I think university is under-leveraged. I want to say that. We are doing workforce development. We can help with evidence-based legislaturing. We can provide research like this. We are willing to, and we can work with everyone in this room to, in whatever way, support your practice on the ground. So we really look forward to making something better, even more to do like this. And we welcome all your, we co-produce things together, not only for women, but with them, with us together. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm very proud that the Community Foundation has, even in small ways, funded everything that we're talking about here, and partnering with all of you, bringing those resources in, keeping those resources in to invest in this work through the Women's Giving Fund, other signature funds, through the university. There are so many ways to really transform, I think, the region. So thank you, all of you. Fantastic. I hope you guys like that, and take care.
Thank you so much to all of our amazing panelists. With that, we have now reached the conclusion of today's event. I would like to thank once again our panelists for your amazing insights. You can keep up with the UCR Center for Community Solutions via their website at communitysolutions.ucr.edu, where you can find exciting news, research, and engagement opportunities. You can also keep up with the UCR School of Public Policy at spp.ucr.edu, or by listening to our official podcast series, Policy Chats, available on all podcast platforms. You can also join us at some of our upcoming events. On June 10th, we will co-host a special election forum for Assembly District 63 alongside the UCR Office of Alumni Engagement. And on June 24th, we will be hosting a webinar on the policy context, politics, and implications of the ongoing tariffs. You can learn more by going to our events calendar. On the info table near registration, we also have information and flyers if you'd like. But with that, thank you all so much for joining us today for this conversation, and please enjoy the rest of your day.